for reasons that are not, I'm not going to divulge now, that she ends up discovering and is able to find out about an account that did exist. So a lot of people, a lot of Jewish people who read the book came to me. They asked me to speak to their synagogues. They asked me to come and speak to their book organizations. I made, during the tour of the novel, I did many visits to Jewish community groups. And they were, of course, fascinated to hear this. And some people in the audience had survived the Holocaust. So I had people raising their hands, and little old ladies raising their hands and telling stories that would just curdle your blood of how they were able to escape the concentration camps and how they've lost all their parents and all their family. And if there's any way that they could still find out if great-grandfather or grandfather had money in Switzerland. So there was a huge reaction to it. And it was all, of course, very positive. I mean, they were, Stuart Eisenstadt, of course, asking me to do as much as I could to divulge this information that, of course, the Swiss banks generally want to keep a secret. They don't want to tell anybody about these big accounts that are still there.
Of course. Okay, Charles, why did you choose to have a woman as your main character?
We're in the 21st century now,
yes.
And I'm a big believer that the 21st century is the century of women. I did, like Alex in the book, I did business school in the United States at Yale. And I noticed, this was just at the turn of the century, how women suddenly are taking the power, in not just in economics, but in business and in many different fields. Politics. I mean, look at how many women are now presidents of countries. So what I thought would be very interesting to do is, because it is a 21st century story, it's not a story like Sean Connery, where you would have to, back in the 60s, it was the main character had to go out and fight and drive a speedboat across the waterfall. The 21st century is a century of using your brain and using emotional skills, using skills that you can get people to do things for you that brute force wouldn't allow. So I thought it'd be very interesting to put a woman in this role of being confronted with a very difficult, dangerous situation, and see how she can use her skills to get things that men have maybe tried for decades to get. Somehow Alex was able to do that. And I think to have a woman as the main character, as a hero, we're going to see more and more of.
Is there a lot of you in the character in your novels, or are they based on other people that you know?
Bruno, I think any novelist puts a lot of him or herself in each character, whether it's an old woman, a young man, an athlete, an intellectual. Every character has, I think, part of you in it. You have to identify with all of your characters. That being said, I was lucky, as we discussed before, to be in contact with this incredibly rich family, not just from a financial point of view, but rich from a cultural and from a human perspective. So I got to meet a lot of really interesting characters, especially from Budapest, who ended up populating the novel. So when Alex meets Sándor, for example, in Budapest, and he starts sounding like Dracula, and she notices that accent, and it evokes something in her. That Sándor person really did exist. He's a person I based that character on. The Brazilian Carlo is another character that I actually knew and was able to base the character on. So in the end, I think it's a mixture of a bit of yourself and then a lot of someone else. And then what's really interesting is then to take this character and have them confront a completely new universe in the novel, which means that they're doing things and experiencing things that neither I nor the original characters ever would have done. So basically what you're doing is playing, and you're putting them in a new context and seeing what happens.
You seem to know a lot about the locations used in your novel. Do you provide your impressions of each place?
I do. I think locations, like characters, is really important.
Yes.
And I think in the idea of trust is that Alex is taken to new places. And that's kind of the whole theme of the novel. But the idea of basing a novel that in places like Budapest, which is an incredibly interesting, exotic place, Zurich, Amsterdam, Paris, New York, Rio and Sao Paulo. A lot of readers of Trust had never been to Brazil, and they saw a Brazil that didn't really correspond to their sort of image of, you know, the beautiful beaches and the beautiful women, and you suddenly see a sort of dark side. You see a Brazil that most people don't know about, and I thought that was really interesting to do, is to try to put, instead of just doing a travel log where you show beautiful cities and people walking down the street, you
the other side that the people don't know.
The other side people don't know, and sometimes don't want to know.
Yes.
There were a lot of Brazilians who talked to me after the book was published and said, why did you say bad things about Brazil? You should be saying good things about Brazil. Yeah. And the idea was to take both sides, but of course, since it is a thriller, obviously to concentrate on the dark side. Yes. And it's a side a lot of people don't really want to know, but of course in a novel it makes for a much more interesting novel. Of course. Especially for a character like Alex, who's a bit naive at the beginning and suddenly is forced to confront the dark side of people and of places.
Charles, what effect did you try to have with Trust?
You know, the idea of the novel for me was to take the main character, because I very much believe in character-driven novels, and to take a character like Alex, who's young, who's bright, who's beautiful, but who doesn't have a lot of experience with life itself. She spent most of her time studying. And of course she's a computer consultant in a Swiss bank. Mm-hmm. And yet she has a very rich, deep inner life that hasn't really had a chance to come out. So by the end of the novel, the idea is that Alex has become a completely different person. And I think that's what makes for an interesting story, is you get to know someone, you like them. And by the end of the book, you've seen how that person is a huge surprise, and they're so different from the person they were at the beginning that you know, if I were to write the sequel to Trust, which I'm thinking of doing right now, you would have to start it at a whole new point. Alex is a completely different person than she was at the beginning.
What was the message you wanted to give to the people?
You know, I don't really know if a writer, and certainly in my case, I don't know if a writer really gives a message. For me, a message, I had a critic once say something to me which affected me very strongly. He said, if you want to send a message, go to Western Union. And the idea with a novel is you don't really need to be giving messages. You need to present on a platter to the reader a very rich, interesting story. And then each reader then can take from that story what they want. Some people might read Trust and just think, well, this is a great adventure. And other people might say, you know, this is like the Jewish families I was telling you about. Might sit down and say, wait a minute, this is a whole side of the world that I haven't even thought, or people who had no sort of knowledge of the Jewish experience in World War II, and how, you know, we've all heard about the Holocaust, but we've never heard the backstory of how families, what they tried to do to preserve their assets for their families. And then, of course, in today's world, the idea that a group like the Hezbollah can have an effect on everyone's daily lives today. When you buy counterfeit goods in a street market, you in fact are contributing money to groups that are using that money for things that you probably wouldn't approve of or agree with. So these are all things that, you know, everybody who reads a book is confronted with an enormous amount of information. And I think the message each person takes away is basically the decision that the reader gets to decide. And the author, basically, we have no control. We just can say, look, this is the story. I've written this story. I've had an enormous amount of fun doing it. I hope you do have fun reading it. But in the end, everyone's going to take a different message away with them.
That's personal.